Recently, Prager University released a video titled, "Is There Life After This Life?" Let's take a look.
Is there an afterlife? Life after this life ends? There probably isn't a human being who hasn't asked this question at one time or another. And here's the answer. If there is a God, there is an afterlife. It's that simple.
It's that simple if you were born yesterday and are completely ignorant of world history and world religions. It's only simple if you have a simplistic mind and a simplistic understanding. But when you actually go outside of your tiny little bubble and explore the rest of the world, you find out there's many different beliefs and then many perceptions of God and beliefs in an afterlife where there is no Western concept of God. You have the ancient Egyptians that believed in resurrection, we would come back in our own bodies, or there was non-existence. You would either be resurrected like Isis resurrected Osiris, or you would just cease to exist, and this is why they mummified bodies to preserve the bodies. You have Hinduism, which is the oldest practiced religion, far older than Judaism, and they believed in karma, and based on karma, reincarnation. Then you have Judaism, which is basically heaven or non-existence, and then you have Christianity and Islam, which is heaven and hell, either one or the other, although there's sects of Christianity where you also have this purgatory middle state. So it's really not that simple when you get down into all the different concepts of God, of which over history there are thousands. Once again, it's only simple if you have a simplistic mind and a very simplistic understanding of the subject.
And here's why. First, this life is filled with an immeasurable amount of injustice and suffering. The only way there can be some ultimate justice for victims of evil is if there is an afterlife. And the only way comfort is available to those who suffer unjustly, from painful disease and premature death to the death of a child, is if there is an afterlife. But such an afterlife exists only if there is a good and just God. A good and just God provides a way to compensate for all the unjust suffering in this world.
He seems to be arguing that there's no way to achieve justice in this life, which is not true. He talks about disease, but what's the best way to counter disease? That's through advancements in science and medicine, which has advanced considerably and has resulted in much less suffering and death, certainly much less child deaths, infant mortality rates based on the level of medical care. And of course, nutrition has a lot to do with this to try to lower those percentages as much as possible. So there's certainly things that we can do in this life to address everything that he mentioned. And then he talks about ultimate justice and a good and just God. Well, if you're talking about the God in the Bible, then you're not talking about a good and just God. Now, if you're talking about an idea outside of the Bible, well, fine. Socrates had an idea of a good and just God that was outside of the religion of his people, what we now refer to as Greek mythology, which was based on writings from Homer. Well, when you look at the writings from Homer and you look at Zeus, Zeus was not a good and just God, and therefore Socrates rejected that idea because that is the concept that he believed in. So if Dennis Prager really believes in this concept of God that's good and just, is he going to be like Socrates and recognize that definition does not match the definition of the scripture that his people are adhering to as far as what this God is?
Second, since God is not physical, the physical world is not the only reality. There is also a non-physical reality. And we humans have a part of us which, being non-physical, survives the death of our body. We call it the soul. But if there is no God, this physical life is all there is. So, no God, no soul, no afterlife.
It's To say that if there's no God, there's no soul is once again isn't true and shows an ignorance of world religions. When you look at Confucianism, there is a spirit world. When you die, you present yourself to your ancestors. Heaven is presenting yourself with pride. You followed the Tao, the noble way. Hell is presenting yourself with shame. And there is no Western concept of God. So you can believe in a soul, you can believe in an afterlife without believing in the concept of God. But when it comes to this idea, this part of ourselves that's never changing and eternal, the problem is we are not static beings. We are dynamic. We change. The child becomes an adult. Life events change us, change the way we think, change the way we perceive different concepts. So, what version of ourselves would go on? And the idea that the soul is static while we are dynamic, you definitely have a mismatch. It's just not conforming to reality. Plus, we know that everything that makes up who we are, our personality, our mental strengths and weaknesses, our sense of humor, our mannerisms, all this is in the physical brain. We know what happens when there's chemical imbalance within our skull. We know what happens when there's brain damage. These things can completely change who we are, and that presents a lot of evidence that we are the physical brain. This is what we are. We are part of the material world, and there's no rational reason to believe that we live on after our physical brain shuts down.
Now, of course, those who doubt God's existence have every reason to doubt an afterlife. But if you believe in a good God, then you have to believe there's an afterlife. If you say you believe in God but not in an afterlife, the God you believe in is not only not good, that God is cruel. That God made a world filled with unjust suffering and just left it at that.
The God that Dennis Prager believes in left the world with unjust suffering and just left it at that. But believing in a God but not believing in the afterlife doesn't mean you believe in a cruel God. It simply means you believe in an indifferent God. You can be a deist and believe that something supernatural created the universe, and so that question's answered. But then why does it seem like if there was a God, it would be indifferent? The universe is certainly indifferent. The universe doesn't care about what justice or injustice is going on in this world that we perceive. So it doesn't mean you believe in a cruel God. You could just believe in a God that really isn't concerned, that's completely indifferent.
Now, some people who don't believe in an afterlife offer their own version of immortality. I once attended a funeral where the man officiating said, "While there is no afterlife, we do live on through our good works and in the memories of loved ones." That's what a lot of people who reject an afterlife want to believe. But the idea that human beings live on through their good works or through the memories of loved ones, which generally means a person's children or grandchildren, is simply meaningless.
To do good works and to leave good memories after we pass away is meaningless, according to Dennis Prager. Apparently, he thinks in order to promote his worldview, he has to make ugliness out of doing good deeds and leaving good memories. He just comes across as extremely petty. Aren't these attributes we should strive for, whether you're religious or not, whether or not you believe in an afterlife or not, to do good deeds and to leave good memories?
If people live on through their good works, then children who die don't live on. The number of good works most children are even capable of is minuscule.
That's not what we mean when we use the term good works. We're not talking about winning a Nobel Prize. Random acts of kindness can be considered good works, and that's certainly something that children are capable of. I can't believe Dennis Prager's completely twisted interpretation of these words.
As for babies who die, well, babies can't engage in good works at all, so I guess they just don't live on. Anyway, the truth is, that bad works usually live on longer than nearly any good works. In fact, if works make us immortal, Hitler, with all the evil he did, is far more immortal than the kindest people on earth.
Dennis Prager seems to have a warped sense of good deeds. He thinks it's all about ego. It's all about fame. It's all about to get our name on front page news. And that's not what it's about. Strangers commit acts of kindness every day, and they do it without recognition. People make anonymous donations to charity. I mean, think about a church that's doing a food drive for some poor country where people are really suffering. And so they got this basket going around and people are putting money into it. Well, somebody putting $10 in isn't saying, okay, I'm putting in $10, but make sure my name is on that. And whatever food this goes to give somebody, make sure you give them my name. Make sure they knew who it's coming from. That's not what this is about. I just can't believe this man's perception is this screwed up. That's this petty. It's not about ego. It's not about fame. And this actually reminds me of a passage in the New Testament. This is from Matthew chapter 6, verse 2. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Make an anonymous donation that's going to help people. They won't know your name, but they will still be helped. And once again, when we talk about good deeds, we're not talking about winning a Nobel Prize. Random acts of kindness are considered good deeds.
Saruman believes that it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. I found it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Simple acts of kindness and love.
As for living on in the memories of our children, what do we say to those who have no children? Sorry, you don't live on.
It doesn't have to be their own children, Dennis.
Moreover, living on in anyone's memory, as beautiful as that is not the same as immortality or an afterlife.
Nobody is arguing that it is the same thing. We fully recognize that they are not the same thing. The only one confused about this, Dennis, is you.
As Woody Allen put it, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. If there's no afterlife, we don't live on. Period. Let's be honest enough to acknowledge that.
Yes, there's no confusion here.
If there's no afterlife, none of us will ever again be with those we most love and who love us. If there's no afterlife, neither anyone murdered nor any murderer will ever receive ultimate justice. If there's no afterlife, this life, for the vast majority of people who ever lived and for those alive now, is a meaningless crapshoot. Finally, people always ask me, so what happens in the afterlife? To which I can only respond, I don't know.
So after rambling on that an afterlife means ultimate justice, he then admits that he has no idea what an afterlife even would be. And when it comes to justice, let's talk about the concepts of an afterlife that we have in the New Testament and the Quran. A concept that's not about any kind of deeds, whether you were murdered, whether you murdered people. It isn't about any kind of actions or character. It's simply about believing. If you believe in a God of a certain religion and you offer yourself for redemption, then you go to heaven and everybody else goes to hell. In which case, Dennis Prager, being Jewish, would be in hell. So imagine dying, finding yourself suffering, and seeing all your lost loved ones suffering endlessly. Think about how horrifying that would be. And that would be coming from this just and good God. That would be absolutely terrifying. And yet, that's the way that many millions of Christians and Muslims believe. Just something to think about regarding this wondrous afterlife.
But I do know this. My belief in God and the afterlife keeps me sane.
If you believe that the God of the Bible is a good and just God, you are not sane. You are out of your freaking mind.
The thought that this life is all there is means that torturers get away with the horrors they have engaged in. It means that this life is random and pointless.
I never understood the idea that unless we exist forever, that life is meaningless and pointless. Seems like the opposite.
And therefore the thought of death is very final for you. For me, as a good Irish Catholic boy, it's the start of something new and glorious. For you, that's it.
For me, it's the end of something glorious, so I have to pack it all in. But, you know, I'm not depressed about it. I don't want to die any more than anyone else. And I think there's this strange myth that atheists have nothing to live for. It's the opposite. We have nothing to die for.
You have more to live for.
We have everything to live for.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would imagine you have a more focused attention to life because you think it ends when you die.
I think it's precious. I think it's beautiful. I think the world is amazing. I love people, animals, art, every hobby. I can't believe my luck that I'm alive for these 70 or 80 years.
It means that this life is random and pointless. And it means that I will never again see anyone I love.
Dennis Prager needs to understand, just because he loves people doesn't mean they want to spend an eternity with him. Could you imagine listening to Dennis Prager ramble on forever?
But enough about me. I hope this hasn't been boring for you. It's just that whenever I start to talk about Elaine, I always get so carried away. I lose all track of time. Well, I could go on for hours, but I'd probably start to bore you. You know, I really couldn't blame Elaine. She wanted a career. When they built those roads, they had no thought of drainage in mind. So we had to take a special Jeep up to the main road. In fact, we were lucky to even get a Jeep, since just the day before, only one that we had broke down.
This would drive me mad.
That train already left the station.
In fact, I don't see how it wouldn't drive anyone mad who cares about suffering and who loves anyone.
If anyone cares about suffering, how could they be promoting what's in the Bible? But here it seems like Dennis is trying to say, well, anybody that cares about suffering and has loved people, well, they'd just be delusional like I am. Atheists have suffered just as much as everybody else. We've loved people just as much as everybody else. Having the wits to understand what is real and being adult enough to accept it doesn't mean we don't suffer and we don't love. It means that we deal with it and we deal with the reality. We deal with it as adults.
So is there an afterlife? If there is a God, of course there is. I'm Dennis Prager.
If Dennis Prager would break out of his tiny little worldview, he would understand that you can believe in God without believing in an afterlife, and you can believe in an afterlife without believing in God. But that ends the segment. Hope you enjoyed watching. Until next time.
Cisco, do we have to leave all our good friends now? Only until next time, Pancho. Adios, amigos.